And when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth. Luke 23:27-31. And there followed him a great company of people, and of women, which has also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus turning unto them said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves, and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in a dry? Jesus said, Matthew 24:19, And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. And Jesus said, But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart. And let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be a great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword, and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Impostors and false prophets deluded the pitiable people, who as if moonstruck, blind and senseless, paid no attention to God's clear portents and warnings of the approaching desolation. A star stood over the city like a sword, and a comet that lasted for a year. Then prior to the war, when the people had gathered for the feast of unleavened bread on the 8th of Xanthicus, at 3 a.m., a light shined on the temple and the altar so brightly that it seemed to be midday, and this lasted for a half an hour. To the inexperienced, this seemed a good omen, but the sacred scribes gave the true interpretation. During the same feast, a cow brought forth for sacrifice by the high priest gave birth to a lamb in the middle of the temple. And at midnight the eastern gates of the inner sanctuary opened itself, a gate of bronze fastened by iron bars and secured by long bolts so massive that 20 men were required to shut it each evening. Not long after the feast, on the 21st of Artemisius, a demonic apparition of incredible size was seen. It would have seemed a fairy tale, and had it not been attested by eyewitnesses and followed by disasters that corresponded to the omens. Before sunset there appeared in the sky over the whole land chariots and armed forces speeding through the clouds and surrounding the cities. And at the feast of Pentecost, when the priests entered the temple at night for their usual ceremonies, they heard a disturbance, a loud crash, and then a thunderous cry, "Let us leave this place." Something even more alarming took place 4 years before the war. During a time of peace and prosperity, a common peasant, Yeshua, son of Ananias, came to the Feast of Tabernacles, stood in the temple courts, and suddenly shouted, "A voice from the east! A voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and the temple, a voice against bridegrooms and brides, a voice against all the people. Night and day he went through the narrow streets with this cry. Some of the prominent townspeople, enraged at this ominous words, seized the fellow and lashed him savagely. However, he uttered not a word in his own defense, but persisted in shouting the same thing. The authorities assumed correctly that the man's conduct was inspired by something supernatural, brought him before the Roman governor Albinus. There, though he was scourged to the bone, he uttered no plea for mercy and shed no tear, but straining his voice to the utmost, he wailed with each blow, "Woe! Woe to Jerusalem!" The siege of Jerusalem. For the wealthy to remain in Jerusalem was equally dangerous, since under the pretext of desertion, many were killed for their money. But the madness of the rebels increased with the famine, and the terror of both flared more fiercely every day. Since no grain could be seen anywhere, they broke into homes and ransacked them. If they found any, they tormented the occupants for claiming there was none. If not, they tortured them for having hidden it too well. The bodies of the miserable wretches were evidence enough of whether or not they had it. If sound, they were deemed to have plenty of food, while those already emaciated were passed by, for it seemed unreasonable to kill those who would soon die of starvation. Many secretly bartered their property for a measure of wheat, if they were rich, or barley if poor. Then shutting themselves inside of the innermost interior of their houses, some ate their grain raw in extreme hunger, while others baked bread as necessity or fear dictated. No table was set. They snatched the food from the fire uncooked and tore it into pieces. Such pitiful sights would induce tears as the powerful plundered and the weak whimpered. Famine is truly the worst form of suffering, and decency its greatest victim. All restraints were shunned as women grabbed food from the very mouths of their husbands, children from their fathers, and most horrid of all, mothers from their babies. And while their dearest ones were dying in their arms, they had no scruples about depriving them of the last morsels that might have kept them alive. Partisans everywhere would rob them even of such pickings. For whenever they saw a locked door, they assumed that those inside were dining, and they broke down the doors, rushed in, and all but squeezed the morsels of food out of their throats. Old men were beaten for holding on to their food, and women were dragged by the hair for hiding it in their hands. They showed no pity for gray hair or infancy, but picked up the babies clinging to their scraps and dashed them to the floor. To those who anticipated their coming by gulping down food, they were the more savage, as if defrauded. In their quest for food, they devised dreadful methods of torture, stuffing bitter fetch into the genital passages of their victims and driving sharp stakes into their rears. Torments horrible even to the hair, to get people to reveal a hidden loaf or a single handful of barley. Not that the torturers were hungry. Indeed, their cruelty would have been less savage had it sprung from need. But they were rather giving their madness some exercise and storing up supplies for days to come. When some crawled out at night as far as the Roman siege lines to gather wild herbs and grasses, thinking they had escaped the enemy, the oppressors intercepted them and seized what they were carrying, despite all their pleading and appeals to the awful name of God to share what they had gathered at such risk. They gave them nothing at all, and those robbed were lucky not to have been killed as well. Now unable to leave the city, the Jews lost all hope of survival, and the famine became even worse. Devouring house after house, family after family. The homes were filled with women and children thus destroyed. The alleys with corpses of old men, young men and boys swelling with hunger haunted the marketplace like ghosts and fell dead in their tracks. The sick could not bury their relatives, while those fit evaded the task due to the numbers of the dead and their own uncertain fate. For many fell dead while burying others, and many set out for their own graves while they were still able. There was no weeping or wailing as hunger conquered emotion, and those who were dying looked with dry eyes on those already dead. Deep silence and a lethal darkness shrouded the city. Worse still were the braggarts who broke into houses, stripped clothes from the bodies of the dead, and emerged laughing. They tried the points of their swords on the corpse and even tested the steel by running some through who were still alive. Yet those who begged for the coup de grace, they contemptuously left to the famine. Each of these died with eyes fixed on the temple, rather than on the partisans he was leaving alive. These at first ordered the dead buried at public expense due to the intolerable stench. But later, when this proved impossible, they threw them from the walls into the valleys. When Titus, as he made his round, saw them full of the dead, the putrid gore oozing from the rotting bodies, he groaned and raised hands. He called God to witness that this was not his doing. I cannot refrain from stating my feelings. I think that if the Romans had delayed their attack on these wicked scoundrels, the earth would have opened and swallowed the city, or a flood would have overwhelmed it, or lightning destroyed it. Like Sodom, for it produced a far more godless generation than those who suffered there. It was due to their madness that all the people perished. The best of friends wrestled with each other for even the shadow of food. Others, mouths agape from hunger like mad dogs, staggered along, beating on the doors like drunken men and breaking into the same house 2 or 3 times in a single hour in their hapless state. They put their teeth into everything, swallowing things even the filthiest animal would not touch. Finally, they devoured even belts and shoes, or gnawed at the leather they stripped from their shields. Some fed on wisp or old hay, for there were people who gathered straw and sold a tiny bunch for 4 Attic drachmas. But why speak of inanimate things that hunger drove them to eat? I shall now relate something unparalleled in the annals of Greece or any other country, a deed horrible to tell and incredible to hear. I would gladly have omitted this tragedy, lest posterity suspect me of having fabricated it, but countless witnesses of my own generation support me. There was a woman named Mary, the daughter of Eliza, who lived beyond the Jordan in the village of Bethazor, known for family and wealth, and had fled to Jerusalem with the rest of the population, where she was trapped in the siege. The partisan chiefs seized most of the possessions she brought from Perea, and their bodyguards plundered the rest of her property and food through daily raids. In fury, she cursed the looters, but when none of them killed her, either in anger or pity, she yielded to rage and hunger. Defying nature, she took her own baby boy, whom she was suckling, and said,
"Poor little mite, why do I keep you alive in war, famine, and rebellion? If we live, we're Roman slaves. But hunger will overtake slavery, and the partisans are worse than both. Come, be my food, an avenging fury to the rebels, and the one story of Jewish suffering that the world must still hear."
With these words, she killed her son, then roasted him and ate half, hiding the rest. At that moment, the partisans arrived, and smelling the unholy aroma, threatened her with instant death if they were not given what she had prepared. She replied that she had saved a fine helping for them and uncovered the remains of her child. Overcome with horror, they were stupefied at the sight. But she said,
"This child was my own, and the deed was mine too. Don't be more squeamish than a woman, or more tender-hearted than a mother. But if you're queasy and disapprove of my sacrifice, then, since I've eaten half, you may as well leave me the rest."
They went away trembling, cowards for the first time, who scarcely gave up even this food. But horror immediately filled the entire city, everyone seeing the tragedy before his own eyes and shuddering as if the crime were his own. The starving sought death and envied those who had realized it before seeing or hearing these outrageous atrocities. And Jesus said, Matthew 23 and 37, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord."